In this video, you will learn how to divide by a one-digit divisor where there is a 0 in the quotient, quotient meaning the answer. And also, you'll learn how to find the average of a set of numbers. So what we're doing today with the division with the 0 in the quotient is basically the same thing that you've learned in the past with division. But we want to explain to you briefly here what to do when you do have a 0 in the answer. So let's work through some examples. Example 1, don't forget your steps when you are dividing. But let's say we are to divide 837 by 8. Remember, a fraction does mean division, so we are dividing 837 by 8. So you get set up like this right here, and you begin your process. So we divide, so we take this 8 here and divide it by the 8 over here. So 8 divided by 8 is 1, so you put a 1 up here. Step 2 is multiply. Take the 1, multiply it by 8. Then you subtract 8 minus 8 to get 0. Step 4 is bring down. So you bring down this 3 and then repeat the process. Now we see how many times does 8 go into 3? Or in other words, 3 divided by 8 is what? Well, 8 does not go into 3 at all. So this is where the 0 comes in. So 8 does not go into 3 at all. It goes in 0 times. So you have to put a 0 up here on the top. Alright, so that's the only thing different. And now step 2 again is multiply. We do the 0 times the 8 over here. That gives you 0. So you put a 0 down here and then subtract 3 minus 0, which is 3. Bring down the 7 and then repeat the process. So now we divide again. 37 divided by 8. That gives you 4 with a remainder. So you put a 4 up here. Now we multiply for step 2. 4 times 8 is 32. Step 3 is subtract. 37 minus 32 is 5. And then we are at the end of our numbers up here. So 5 would be the remainder. So your answer is 104 with a remainder of 5. Alright, so the only thing different here with this problem is the 0. So if you come across that, you can put a 0 there and just carry on as normal. And we can still check our answer like we normally could. So if you want to double check your answer, we could by taking the 104, multiplying it by the 8, and then adding the remainder of 5. So if you do 104 times 8 plus 5, we can multiply 104 times 8. 8 times 4 is 32. So take the 2, carry the 3. 8 times 0 is 0, plus the 3 is 3. And then 8 times 1 is 8. So what we have is 832 plus 5, which gives you 837. So notice that we have the same answer that we have over here. Those are the same numbers. So because of that, we have confirmed that our solution was correct. Your answer is indeed 104 with a remainder of 5. Let's try another example. So you can try this one on your own if you like. You can pause the video and then unpause when you have your solution. What we're doing here is we are doing 426 divided by 4. Alright, so again, the fraction means division. And now we can set up like this. 426 divided by 4. So we begin like normal. We have to see how many times does 4 go into this 4 right here. Or in other words, 4 divided by 4 is what? That's going to give you 1. So you put a 1 up here. And then you multiply 1 times 4 to get 4. And then we subtract 4 minus 4 to get 0. And then you bring down the 2 and then repeat the process. So now we see how many times does 4 go into 2. So this is where the 0 comes in. 4 does not go into 2. So 4 goes in 0 times. So you put a 0 up here on the top. Now we can do step 2, which is multiply. 0 times 4 gives you 0. And then subtract. 2 minus 0 gives you 2. Now we can bring down the 6 and then repeat the process. So now we see 26 divided by 4 is what? Well, it's going to be 6 with a remainder. So you put a 6 up here. We multiply 6 times 4 to get 24. Subtract 26 minus 24, and that gives you 2. So this number right here, that is your remainder. So your solution is 106 with a remainder of 2. Let's take a look at one more example. Here we have 618 divided by 3. So again, to set this up, we have 618 here, then divide by the 3, with the 3 on the outside. And we can begin our process with step 1, where we divide the 6 by the 3. 6 divided by 3 is 2, so put the 2 up here. Step 2 is multiply. 2 times 3 is 6. Step 3 is subtract. We subtract 6 minus 6 to get 0. And then step 4 is you bring down the 1, and then repeat the process back at step 1. So now we see 1 divided by 3 is what? Or in other words, how many times does 3 go into 1? Well, it goes in 0 times, so you put a 0 up here. And then step 2 is multiply. The 0 times the 3 gives you 0. And then we can subtract 1 minus 0 to get 1. And then step 4 is bring down the 8. And then repeat the process all over again. So now step 1, we divide 18 by 3. That gives you 6. We put a 6 up here. Step 2 is multiply. 6 times 3 to get 18. Step 3 is subtract. 18 minus 18 is 0. And there's nothing to bring down because we're at the end of the numbers. So 0 is your remainder. So there is no remainder, which means your solution is just 206. So again, notice that in this lesson, there's not really anything new necessarily, just the fact that there may be times that you need to put a 0 up here in your answer. But all the steps are the same, so if you know the process, there's not really anything new particularly. Now, the second half of the lesson, we want to explain how to find the average of something. So first off, what is average? Well, average is kind of like the middle number. All right, so it's a number kind of in the center of everything. And the way we can find the average, the process, is we have to find the sum of the numbers. So you add all the numbers together, and then you divide that sum by the number of atoms, meaning the number of numbers that you're adding together, you divide by that number. So what does that look like? Well, here we have example 1, where we are told to find the average of 5 and 15. So again, the process is we're going to find the sum. So you're going to add 5 plus 15. So you take 5 plus 15, and then whatever that is, you divide by the number of atoms. So you look at the number of numbers that we're adding together. So we have 2 numbers, 5 and 15. That's 2 different atoms. So you're dividing that by 2. So we have 5 plus 15, divide by 2. 5 plus 15 is 20, and then divide by 2, that gives you 10. So the average of 5 and 15 is 10. And maybe a way of thinking of this, even with at least 2 numbers, so if you think of a number line, here's 0, 2, 3, 4, 5 is right here, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 is over here. What we're basically finding is what number is in the middle, in between 5 and 15. So we found it to be 10, so it's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 right here. So notice on the number line that 10 is right in the center. So here's 5, here's 15, and then the average is 10, right in between those 2 numbers. So it's easier to visualize with only 2 numbers. So if you're averaging just 5 and 15, it's not too bad to visualize that. But when you have more numbers than just 2, it's going to be harder to visualize, but the process will be the same. So let's take a look at example 2, where here we are to find the average of 3, 4, and 11. So your process, remember, is step 1, you find the sum, meaning you're going to add all these numbers together. So you add 3, 4, and 11 together. And then step 2 is once you have that sum, you're going to divide by the number of atoms. Well, in this case, we're adding 3 numbers together, 3, 4, and 11. So we have to divide by 3 in this case. because we're adding 3 numbers. So we do 3 plus 4 plus 11. That gives you 7 plus 11, which is 18. And then divide that by 3. And 18 divided by 3 is 6. So the average of the numbers 3, 4, and 11 is 6. And by the way, it's worth pointing out that another way of expressing our initial setup right here is we could write this with a fraction. So either is fine, it's the same steps, but just another way of writing it. So we could write it like this, where we have 3 plus 4 plus 11, and then instead of writing the divide sign, we could write a fraction bar like this. So 3 plus 4 plus 11, and remember a fraction means divide. So you could write it like this, and that would be the exact same thing. Because we would get 18 on the top, 3 on the bottom. 18 divided by 3 is equal to 6. Let's try one more example. So for example 3, here we're trying to find the average of 1, 3, 3, 6, and 7. Alright, so now we have 5 different numbers, and here, remember step 1 is find the sum. So you have to add all those numbers together. 1 plus 3 plus 3 plus 6 plus 7. And then once you have that, we are dividing. So you can write it with a fraction bar or the divide sign. But you're dividing by the number of addends. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 numbers that we're adding. So we have to divide by 5. So we work through this. 1 plus 3 is 4. 4 plus 3 is 7. 7 plus 6 is 13. 13 plus 7 is 20. So we have 20 divided by 5. And 20 divided by 5 is equal to 4. So the average of those numbers, 1, 3, 3, 6, and 7, is 4. And again, this average, this number that we found, is kind of like the number in the middle. So it's the average or the middle number of all 5 of these numbers. And that concludes our lesson for today. We will see you next time.